Welcome, folks, to the first edition of the Dr. Foster Show. I'm Mark A. Foster, Professor of Sociology, and today's show will be about critical realism. Critical realism is a philosophy that was developed by a British fellow by the name of Roy Bhaskar, who sometimes these days goes by the name of Roy Bhaskar. His father was of Indian ancestry, Indian, and his mother was English. He grew up in Great Britain, and his parents were theosophists. Theosophy is a religion that was started back in the 1800s by Helena Blavatsky, kind of a syncretistic religion, in other words, sort of a combination of all sorts of different things. A lot of influence of Buddhism and Hinduism, kind of a version of what some people have called the perennial philosophy. In other words, believing that there has been one single message which has been taught throughout the ages and has been voiced in different ways. Interesting idea, kind of occultic in the sense of claiming to be the repository of certain esoteric or secret truths that Blavatsky had been able to reveal as a result of her encounters with certain extraordinary beings while in India. In any event, Roy Bhaskar's parents converted to this movement, the Theosophical Society. Bhaskar grew up in that, and he talks about how he used to spend time visiting the Theosophical Library in Great Britain, but he never, as an adult, actually became a theosophist. When he started the philosophy of critical realism, critical realism really had no particular spiritual focus. It was entirely a secular philosophy, and what I'll do now is I'll talk about that, and then I'll talk about some of the transitions that critical realism has gone through more recently, beginning in the year 2000. What Bhaskar says is that there is a stratified reality. Stratified means layered. In other words, there are different layers of what is reality. Bhaskar says that there are three primary layers. Those layers are the real, the actual, and the empirical. Start with the real, then finish up with the empirical. The real, according to Bhaskar, are the underlying mechanisms or structures that are responsible for what we can observe. The real cannot be seen. We can speculate on it, and in fact, Bhaskar does speculate on the real in different situations, but it's not something that we have any direct knowledge of. And in fact, perhaps the reason why there are so many different views of what is the real, of what is reality, is not that there are different realities, but simply because our own ability to understand what is real is limited by ourselves. So the limitations have nothing to do directly with the real. They really are limitations that we have, not limitations of the real. So the real refers to those underlying mechanisms which cannot be observed. For example, gravity. Nobody has ever seen gravity, as far as I know, and yet we know that if you take any object of any size or mass and you drop it in a vacuum, that object will fall at a constant rate of 32.2 feet per second squared. That's kind of counterintuitive, because obviously you would think that a larger object would fall more rapidly, but that's not true in a vacuum. Any object will fall at that constant rate. So we know that's what gravity does. And we know other things about gravity too. And yet no one has ever seen it. But in spite of the fact that no one has ever seen gravity or touched it or felt it or smelled it, we talk about the law of gravity. So we have a law concerning something that nobody has ever directly sensed. So in a sense, gravity itself is speculative. Now it's a very good speculation. Certainly is probably the best speculation that we have. Other attempts to speculate on what might cause the things that we cause gravity have not been very successful. Gravity has. And so gravity, beginning with Isaac Newton and his mechanistic physics, has stood the test of time. And so today we still speak in terms of gravity. Another example. There's a theory in physics. It's one of the contenders, perhaps the leading contender, for a grand unified theory in physics. It's called Theory M. M as in Michael or Mark. And Theory M basically says that there are 11 dimensions, and that those 11 dimensions include various strings, and that these strings are vibrating within these 11 dimensions. Now we know what the first 4 dimensions are: height, width, and depth, and of course time as the 4th. But then these physicists have also speculated on what the remaining 7 dimensions are as well, in spite of the fact that, again, nobody's ever seen them. Well, then again, nobody has ever seen height, width, depth, and time either. And yet we talk about it as if we have. We observe the results of those things, but we really have not actually observed certainly the strings, certainly the dimensions, and certainly gravity. So those would be examples of the real. Now, if we carry through that, below the real, according to Bhaskar, is what he refers to as the actual. The actual refers to events. Events which are caused by the mechanisms in the real. Now, we can't observe the real, but we can observe the actual. In other words, we can observe what things do. Like, for example, we can observe that an object falls at that rate of 32.2 feet per second squared. That's something that we can observe. We can't observe gravity, but we can observe an event which is caused by gravity. Similarly, if we take that and move that into a more human-centered subject, let's say human nature. Same thing. No one has ever seen human nature. We talk about it. It's been debated for thousands of years what it is, whether people have free will, for example, whether it is so-called human nature to be selfish, whether it is human nature to be altruistic, or whatever. People debate what is human nature, and there are all sorts of views on it, so there's no real settled position on what is human nature, and yet people talk about it as if it's real. When I look out at my classes, I see individuals, sitting in those chairs, my college students, but I don't see human nature, and yet we talk about it as if it's a real thing. So in effect, human nature is the real. It's a part of the real. It's something that we are speculating upon, but have not directly seen. But we talk about it to some extent based upon the events which supposedly are caused by it. The third level of reality is what Bhaskar refers to as the empirical. Empirical refers to experience, in this case, observable experience. In other words, something that we can sense. And this is the position of the individual, for example, the position of the scientist, whether natural scientist, social scientist, or whatever. The person who is actually observing the events in this actual level, and then making speculations about the real. So, in other words, the empirical refers to the position of the observer. Okay, so that completes the three levels, or the three layers, or strata of reality, the basic ones, that were originally laid out as a part of critical realism by Roy Bhaskar. Now, beginning in the year 2000 is what has been widely referred to, and also referred to by Bhaskar, as his spiritual turn. Bhaskar began making trips to India. He began looking at various Indian Vedic texts, considering various Eastern philosophies, especially those rooted in Hinduism and Buddhism. And based upon doing that, he fine-tuned critical realism and came up with something that he called the philosophy of meta-reality, which has been referred to by some other peoples as meta-realism. And meta-reality, the philosophy of meta-reality, is basically a way of understanding reality on a somewhat deeper level than was possible using critical realism itself. So even though the philosophy of meta-reality is a continuation, in a sense, of critical realism, it also brings critical realism to a greater depth than it had in the earlier years. Bhaskar says that the real includes at least two layers. Those two layers are, the first one can be called either the cosmic envelope or co-presence. I prefer co-presence as a sociologist. I think it's clearer, indicating that I am present with other people, co-with, present. So to me that's a more sensible term as a sociologist. That's how I present it to my students. And then the level or layer below that, below co-presence, is what Bhaskar refers to as demi-reality. Demi-reality is basically disunity. It's alienation. It's people being cut off from each other. I mean, literally alienation in the sense that alienation. People literally feeling like aliens where they are, like they simply don't belong where they are. And if you look at modern day society, there is certainly a great deal of alienation in modern day society. So demi-reality can be looked at also as a kind of social disorganization. With all the crises happening all over the world, whether in the Middle East, in Western countries, in the Far East, there is certainly a lot of demi-reality around. So Bhaskar, in effect, has proposed co-presence as a solution for demi-reality. Now, he's not saying that demi-reality and co-presence are stages of consciousness. In other words, Roy Bhaskar is not an idealist. Idealists talk in terms of consciousness in many cases. That's not what Bhaskar is saying. Bhaskar is saying is that demi-reality and co-presence are real. They are real layers. They are actual realities. They're not simply creations of our consciousness. Our consciousness may be influenced by them, but our consciousness does not create them. They are independent of our consciousness. We observe them relatively, fallibly, based upon our ability to observe the events they produce, but we don't actually create them directly. So if we look at that and consider the importance of this idea of co-presence, according to Bhaskar, what we see is that Bhaskar, in effect, has taken Marxism, which is part of his tradition that he's rooted in, and has created what I sometimes call a trans-Marxism, or a transcendent Marxism. In other words, he's taken Marxism and moved it to an entirely new level. Marxism, in a general sense, in a broad sense, refers to two things. One is emancipation or liberation, and the other is domination or oppression. And what Bhaskar has said is that the key to emancipation is co-presence, or the cosmic envelope. In other words, recognizing our unity as opposed to staying in this condition of demi-reality or disunity. Co-presence, literally living with other people, being united in our differences, being united in our diversity. And so to Bhaskar, that is emancipation, ultimately. And in fact, Bhaskar goes further, and he says that the ultimate objective, or the goal of any project of emancipation, is reaching the cosmic envelope or co-presence. In other words, ultimately we recognize this kind of non-duality, this kind of singleness, that we are all connected to one another. So it's a very interesting philosophy. It's one that has been developed by many sociologists, including myself, into various sociological perspectives or theories, and I think it holds a great deal of promise. So until next time, this is Dr. Mark A. Foster, signing off. Have a good one.